sharing "Oh Holy Night" for some special music.
My good wife Jackie and I are always happy when we can meet with you folks here. It's it's good for us to renew our acquaintances once in a while here. So far, it seems like you've had a very lively Sabbath service. Maybe the only thing I can contribute to it is to sit down and let you folks go back to sleep. I should apologize this morning if I'm not as vigorous as you might have expected. Some of you know that I had rather a difficult accident earlier in the year in which I had to glue some of my bones together into my back. Still to the present day, it doesn't feel like they're all really assembled yet. Prearranged advantage. Our text has been read for us from Romans, the 5th chapter. If you have your Bibles with you, I would advise you to open your Bible on your knee, because we'll be referring, we'll be referring to this text throughout our consideration. As I was thinking about the privilege that we would be studying together here this morning, I was impressed with the thought. I was impressed very strongly with the thought that there would be one man here, maybe a lady, who has been wrestling with difficulty of an overcoming life. Excuse me. Such a person realizes that God expects holiness of us. And yet, such a person may be confronted with the idea, sadly, that it has been a difficult thing to bring one's life into conformity with the expectations of God. I've got news for you this morning. I've got something that... Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. That personal message for you individually, I have brought it here this morning. And I trust that you will take greater courage. In fact, all of us may find something in this which will awaken our courage and our trust in God. We have much to be thankful for. Our main text that we will consider this morning is found in Romans, the 5th chapter, and the 6th verse. Let's look at that together just for a moment. And I want to tell you I will be reading from the New King James Version as I read various texts. And here in the 6th verse it says, "For when we were still without strength, in due time Christ died for the ungodly." I think that text actually would be clearer to us if it had been translated this way. When we were still without strength. That means still, while we were still ungodly. In due time, at an appropriate time, Christ died for us. Our intention this morning is to unwrap this text, to see what it might mean for each one of us personally. What does it mean at an appropriate time Christ died for us? I want you to consider what that means for you personally. It does. It has some special meaning in there just for you personally. Awaken them to it. In order to decide, in order to unwrap it and find out actually what is meant here, we have to look at the 7th verse and the 8th verse. For scarcely for a righteous man will one die, yet perhaps for a good man someone would even dare to die. But God demonstrates His own love toward us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Hold on there just a moment. Is that recently that Christ died for you? If my understanding of history is correct, it's almost 2,000 years ago, give or take maybe 50 years. Almost 2,000 years ago, Christ died for you. Were you alive at that time that He should consider your needs? Think about it. You are not alive. My dear brother, my dear sister, when you were still unborn, not even thought about, Christ died for you. I don't know how many generations that would add up to. Are there about 4 generations per century? And that's 20 centuries. You know, that's a lot of time of parents coming and going. And yet, you were almost smaller than a single cell when Christ died. You were part of a gene, maybe of a number of genes. My dear brother and sister, you were a part of a number of different genes of different ancestors. Way back there, you can hardly remember it, can you? Way back there, before you can even remember it, Christ paid a great penalty for you personally. And that should not be underestimated, it seems to me. All too often we are tempted to pass it by as almost simply a little episode in history, and we overlook it. Again, I emphasize, when Christ died, you were almost a split-up gene in a number of different families. If you put all those little microscopic units together, it might come out as something, no, it wouldn't even resemble you. Way back there, before we can even remember or count it, Christ died for you. He had you in mind. And that impresses me. That impresses me. If God, through Christ, would do that for me when I was such a unknown little piece of an entity that doesn't count, at that time, if Christ died for me, I must have something great going for me. Amen. There must be something that I should be very grateful for. Now, if Christ died for you way back then, ahead of time, the blessing was laid out for you hundreds and hundreds of years ago, centuries ago, almost 2 millennia ago. And that should mean something very great to us.
Amen.
Look again at verse 8. God demonstrates His own love toward us in that while we were still sinners, when we were still unthought of, Christ died for you. Ooh, that brings it very personally to me. Christ died for me at that time. He could look ahead in His great divine foreknowledge and see me way down the way before I was even a single gene. Now that's pretty great, and I haven't thought of that very often. But it has impressed itself upon my mind this week as something that must be greater than I've been thinking about. And I determined I was going to think more about it. If Christ, here's the question, if Christ would do that much for you, while you were even a millionth part of maybe of some gene somewhere, if He would do that much and sacrifice His own life, would He not do other things for you? Would He not carry your salvation still further and do other things for you? Look at verse 8. God demonstrates His own love toward us in that while we were still sinners, while we were still unthought of, while we were still unborn, Christ died for us, died for you. Oh, you have to say it to yourself. Christ died for me personally when I was still an unborn particle. If people had tried to assemble me at that time, think of the difficulties they would have had to do. It would be an impossibility, don't you think? For somebody to assemble us way back? Oh no, I shouldn't even talk about it because it just boggles the brain. At that time when people could not assemble even a forerunner of you, Christ looked ahead and paid a most awful price for your salvation. God commends His love to you in view of that. I think back upon the days when I was in my mid-teens, when I first heard about Christianity. I knew nothing about such a thing. At the time, I was raised in a family where my mother knew how to make good home brew. My father knew how to make wine each fall. Was teaching me how to drink wine in appropriate ways. And I and my youthful sister got our bottle of beer a day. To say nothing of other things in my life. That in itself might give you a picture of my religious life at age 14, when I began to hear about Christianity. Without knowledge of God, and yet Jesus had already paid a most awful price for my salvation. When I found out about it, it made a deep impression upon me, and I have been walking in the light of that glorious adventure ever since. God be thanked. We have an advantage. We have a weapon at our hands, really, if we would think about it. We have an advantage in our hands in our fight against the devil. If we just stop and think of how great the love of God has been to us personally, that He would do that for us. even while we were little particles of non-existent matter. Well, let's look at verse 9 and 10 first. Much more then, having now been justified by his blood, we shall be saved from wrath through him. For if, notice these next words, my dear brother, my dear sister, and take these home with you to think over again today. They're important ones. For if, when we were enemies, we were reconciled to God through the death of his Son, much more, having been reconciled, we shall be saved. You may not have thought of it that way, but think of it with me for a few minutes. The two different ways, distinct ways, that God has made him our Redeemer, the one who rescues us. In the first place, let's look together at a text in 1 John. I want you to consider a text because there's a word there I know that you don't know anything about. I hardly know it myself. 1 John. I told my wife this morning that I was going to bring you something that you wouldn't have known before, so I look forward to that. It's kind of fun when you pick out something that the other person doesn't know and you can share it with them. And you'll go back home, think about it, think, well, that sure is interesting. 1 John 2:1. 1 John 2:1. It's a simple verse. You've heard it so many times. I want you to know about it in a different way this morning than you've ever seen it before. It says in my Bible, my little children, these things I write to you that you may not sin. And if anyone sins, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ the righteous. The word in that verse in my particular Bible, the word that is translated advocate with the Father. An interesting word. It's pronounced, in the old manuscripts, it's pronounced parakletos, the paraclete. That word, you don't know, but you will now. That word was used among the ancient Greeks as a designation for your battle buddy that went into the front lines of warfare at your side. He was your sidekick, your battle buddy. He was obligated in the training camps that they went to. He was trained to realize that his obligation as your battle buddy to be encouraging you as you went into the front lines, call over to you and yell at you to keep going. You're doing fine, buddy. Or do you have any troubles? How are things going? He was an encourager. He was obligated to help carry you back in case you got wounded. In case you were killed in battle even, he was obligated to bring your body back. See that you got a good burial. In other words, he was there in the thick of things as your companion in war, ready to help you whenever you needed help. Your paraclete, as some people have technically translated it for this verse. He was your battle buddy. And that was used in the writer of this particular verse, which is translated in my Bible, advocate, but maybe you have something else in your Bible. You have other words that may appear. But you can go home now and realize that in this text, We have a battle buddy with the Father, even Jesus Christ the righteous. Wherever you go through life, if you are interested in the warfare, if you're going into it as a good soldier should, you have an encourager right beside you, one who understands the way things are going and who plans to help you through thick and thin. You can call over to him and get his advice and his encouragement whenever you need it. He is your battle buddy. That's the first way that the Bible tells us we have help at hand in fighting the battles of life. I would advise you, be nice if you would get acquainted with him. But how can you do that? There's one way that when all else fails, you can at least pick up some good reading about him. It would do your soul good if at least once a day you'd get the book Desire of Ages and read a page or two. Make that a good practice and you'll be delighted when you get to the end of that book, even though it takes you a whole year to read it. It's a big book. But when you get to the end of that book, I think you'll be willing to pick up your telephone and phone up Litke and say, I followed your advice and I can tell you it's been a great adventure. I feel closer to Jesus than I never have before. Try it and see. The book is Desire of Ages. If you don't have a copy of it, some of your friends in the church may have an extra one. Beg and borrow it, or when they're not looking, well, just get a hold of a copy of Desire of Ages and read a page or two of it every day. After all, he's your battle buddy, and that's the best book I know that will tell you more than I can tell you. More than I can tell you, that will get you acquainted with the one who is going to be walking into warfare with you. It'll make life meaningful for you. There is a second way. The first one is that Jesus will be there with you to help you fight the battles. The second way that God will help you be an overcomer and will help you through your religious experience so that you never need fail. And this is a way in which he makes up for our differences, our failures, day by day. He gives us his righteousness, which we may lose when we are fighting. Remember, God gave Jesus to us a long time before our birth. But we overcome also by a secret weapon. Look at Revelation 12, verse 11 with me. Revelation 12, verse 11. A verse that probably you haven't looked at recently, but you should. Revelation 12, verse 11. And my Bible says they overcame him. It's talking about the devil here. They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. What does that mean? They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb. That simply means that by his sacrifice, we have overcoming power. If we fail, we can go to him and get forgiven. He has already paid the price, after all. So it will not be difficult or strange for us to go to him if we make a failure and stand up and continue the battle from there on and do better next time. But Every time you fail, make sure you run to Him and get His forgiveness. In fact, this text tells me that it's by doing that they overcame. They overcame the devil by the blood of the Lamb. That is, by seeking His forgiveness. He has paid the price for every sin you've committed, and I think 2 or 3 in the future. In fact, maybe more than that for some. Our job is to try to conquer. But when we fail, make sure that we get His immediate forgiveness and go on from there. I want to share with you also, before I close, Jesus' type of mathematics on this business. It's a secret that maybe not many people have told you about, and it's found in Matthew 18. Look at that with me just for a moment. Matthew 18. It's a strange kind of mathematics. Matthew 18, verses 21 and 22. This records an incident where Peter was wondering about some of these things. And he wondered how many times he should be willing to forgive his fellow Christian. How many times do you think we should forgive? Well, look. Then Peter came to him and said, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Up to 7 times, maybe? Jesus said to him, I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. In other words, Jesus' mathematics on this business of putting up with our foolishness. Apparently it's a different kind of mathematics than I know about. Up to how many times? That's 300 times maybe? No? 190? 490 times. If your neighbor sinned against you that many times, wouldn't you get kind of tired of telling you? Probably after about the 5th time you'd say, forget it. Apparently Jesus has a different system of mathematics on this point. He's not going to kick you out of His family just because you've sinned maybe 150 times. Yes, but Dr. Litke, you don't realize I've sinned maybe, I must have sinned over 400 times. Well, you've still got 90 more. No, this doesn't give us license to just do as we please, but it does open the window for us, or the door, to realize that apparently God works on a different scheme of mathematics than we do. And if we are willing to come to Him and say, I'm sorry, I failed this time, forgive me there too. And already He has paid the price, so it is simple for Him to say, yes, go, but don't louse up again. But what if the next week I loused up again? Go to Him by all means and get His forgiveness. And thank Him for it. And pick up your sword and armor and go at life again. The advice that we're giving to you here at the present time is, don't louse it up, but if you do, don't give up. Don't give up. Sure, we're most of us in here, I'm looking over the whole group of you, it looks to me like the most of us in here are human beings. That's good, probably. But as human beings, we may fail. If there's somebody here who claims that he is not in the habit of failing, check with me afterward. I'd like to get acquainted with you. I'd like to meet you. The rest of you look like human beings, and for you, the number is 490. That's a way of saying His grace is sufficient for you. He'll keep being patient with you and keep encouraging you on. After all, He is your battle buddy. Amen. He's one who will be walking through life with you. And if you don't hit the mark each time, He's going to forgive you and encourage you to do better. That's the gist of my sermon this morning. I thought that this would be something that we all should take to our lives, take courage, and become victorious. The reward at the end will justify it. And I hope that when we all get to the other side and are enjoying our times there, learning a new life, I'd like to meet with you and say, it was quite a battle, wasn't it? But you made it. You made it. And brother, sister, I'm glad you're here. It must have been that you were stayed close to your battle buddy, because I think that's the experience that each one will have. As our closing song, let's sing together. And now, our Father, thank you for the possibilities that you've given to us in your word. We appreciate what you have done for us and what you will do. We take courage from the message of your word. Pray that you'll go with us in a victorious way this week ahead of us. In Jesus' name, amen.